Hello and welcome back to episode number 11 of my Fortnite tutorial series. Today we will solve two problems that came up in the last episode. One was that we always see the health bar of every building, even though we might face a completely different direction. And the other one is that we're currently able to place buildings on top of each other, which you also can't do in Fortnite. So let's fix those. Let's start with the health bars. In Fortnite, when your camera is facing a building or something like a tree, you see the health bar of it appearing, and that will also be hidden again when you turn around. So let's head to our blueprints, classes, and to the BP master building. In here, let's look for some empty room, and we will add two custom events. So one for when we enter the player side and the second one for when we leave it. So let's call the first one on enter player side. Then we can copy and paste it and rename this to on leave player side. Can do on enter first. So we already created our in player side boolean in the last episode. So let's set that to true. Then let's grab a branch. And we want to check whether our building is already built. So the build boolean here. Otherwise we haven't got a health bar if we're just in the previous state. And if that is true, we want to grab our health bar component and set visibility of that to true, so show it. But before we do that, we also have to worry about updating the actual values of the health bar, because it would be a waste of performance to constantly do this. We will only do it when we're in player side. So that means when we enter the player side again, we have to call the update function once. And to do that, grab your health bar reference, not the component. And we will call update health. Hook that up to the true path and to the set visibility node. Then it will be asking you for the new value. So drag in your building stats component here. And then we want to get stat. Stat will be health, because that's the only stat we're using. And then hook up the current value to new value. Okay, that's very simple. Let's continue with on leave player side. We also have to set in player side, this time to false obviously. And then we can copy our build and branch nodes and paste them here. Because if that building here has been placed, we can grab our health bar component. And here we will also set visibility, but this time to false. So our master building now knows what it has to do when it's suddenly in or out of player side. Let's compile and save it. We still have to call these two events here, and our third person character will be responsible for checking where he's looking at. So let's close the master building, open up your third person character in the blueprint editor. And I don't know exactly how that is done in Fortnite, but for this system it will be enough to only ever have one building at a time that we can see. So let's make a variable here. Let's call that currently seen building, and the type for that will be a master building actor or object reference. Compile and save. And we want to add a function here that we will call site trace. So this function will be determining what our player is seeing, and if there is a building, set that to the currently seen building. The function is called site trace because what we will use here is a trace node. Just type in trace. And you will see multiple functions under the collision category with that name. We will use a line trace by channel. What this does, it just fires a line from defined start point to defined end point and returns the first thing that it hit, which is exactly what we want in here. Trace channel will be visibility, doesn't need to be complex. We will check ignore self. And if you actually want to see that trace firing, you could set the draw debug type to something in here. I won't do that. We have to figure out the start and end point now. And they have to be figured out similar to the way that we define the position of buildings in our building manager. So let's grab the building manager and grab his location offset. Then we will add a vector to that. And what we will add is the location of our character itself. So get actor location, then plug that in for the plus and hook that up to the start point. The endpoint is a little bit more complex, but we still need the location offset and that plus node. So let's copy that over. We won't add the actual location, but something else. And for that, off of your building manager, we've got a function in there called get player look at location. And then we want to convert that location to a grid location. So off of your building manager to grid location and hook up the location, then plug in the out for your addition here of the two vectors, and that addition will feed into our end node. It will be asking you for a forward offset. We want to see further than the distance that is used for placing buildings in front of us, and to do that we will just get the forward building offset and multiply that by some value. Let's say it will be 3 times as far as when building, so we will multiply it by 3, hook that up to the forward offset, and that should be it for the math here. Then we have to worry about the return values of that node. So break the out hit, and that will give you a lot of information about what that trace hit. We only care about the hit actor. Let's check whether we hit a building. That is as simple as grabbing the hit actor and casting that to a BP master building. If that cast is successful, you know that you hit a building. However, let's do the cast failed first. So that means our side trace didn't hit anything. And the consequence of that will be that if we have a currently seen building, that would now be cleared because we're no longer staring at it. So grab your currently seen building and check whether it's valid or not on cast failed. If it is valid, we can grab that currently seen building and call one of the 2 custom events we just created, which is on leave player side. And after you did that, set the currently seen building to null. Alright, if that cast here is successful, means we hit a building. Let's also grab our currently seen building and add an is valid. I'll just copy it from here. If it isn't valid, means we haven't got a currently seen building. So we can simply set that variable to our as BP master building, so what we hit, and then off of it call on enter player side. If it is valid, we have to perform one check, so a branch, and we want to see whether the currently seen building is not equal to the hit actor. Then hook that up to the branch. If it's false, we can't do anything. It just means that we're continuing to stare at that currently seen building. But if it's true, means we have to change it, and that means we have to get it first and call on leave player side. After that, set it to the output of your cast node, and then also off of it call on enter player side. Right, compile, save, and that's it for this function. So this logic here handles finding buildings that we stare at and calling the associated event. However, we have to continuously check for buildings. That means repeatedly calling this function, and we will use a timer for that. So close your functions, and on event begin play, right after we add our widget to the viewport, let's set timer by function name. It will be asking you for an object to execute that function, which will just be self. Then the function name is site trace. You can hit F2 and copy that to make sure that you don't do any spelling mistakes. Then paste it in here. I already mentioned we want to call it repeatedly, so looping has to be true. And then the time here, let's make that a variable and call that something like site trace tick rate. Save, and I figured out that a value of 0.05 seconds works fine for me. If you're having problems with your performance, you could increase that, or if you feel that your system is a little bit too clunky, you would lower that. Then let's grab the return value and promote that to a variable, just in case we ever need to stop that timer. For example, if you have a menu where you can pause the game, you would maybe also stop the timer. Let's call that site timer handle, and that's it for the player here. So compile and save. One problem though is that our currently seen building variable is null by default, and if we place a building, we know that we are also currently seeing that, so that means we have to set it when we place a building, and that will be done in our building manager, PPC building manager, place current building. Let's do it directly after our first branch, so grab your player character. We will also grab the currently seen building, and what we do now is very similar to what we did in the function. So we'll check for is valid, hook that up to the true. If it isn't valid, we can simply copy the player character and set currently seen building to the current building. and then proceed with removing the resource. If it is valid, again we have to add a branch, hold B and left click, and let's check that the currently seen building is not equal to the current building. Hook that up to the condition, branch to the is valid. If it's false, means they are the same. But just to make sure, let's go into the set currently seen building node here. However, if it's true, that means they are different. Then we can copy over player character and currently seen building and call on leave player side, because after that we also want to set the currently seen building to something else. Let's compile, save, and see whether we fixed that issue. Alright, I'm in play mode and just added a little bit of resources. Let's start building a wall, and we will place that one here, place another one here, and the third one here. Then I'll hit Q, and if I turn around, you see 200 of 200 HP. If I move my mouse a little bit, look in a different direction, that will be gone. And the same thing works for our two other walls here. So 200 of 200 and 200 of 200. Okay, so that's it for fixing the first issue. Just a little reminder, the second issue was that in Fortnite you're not able to place buildings on top of other buildings, which currently is possible in our project. So let's fix that. And we will start by going into our BP master building class, into the viewport, and we will add a component, which will be a box collision. Just call it box, that's fine. What you could be thinking is that we can just make that box 400 Unreal units in every dimension, which is the size of our grid cells, and then that should work. However, there is a little problem with that, because in Fortnite you can actually place walls, for example, on the edges of two aligning floor tiles, and you can place stairs on top of floors. And if you just block the entire cell of the grid, that wouldn't work. So my fix for that will just be making a very small box and adjusting its location for every building class. Let's go to the box extend and make that 90 in all dimensions. And then we'll go to the location and set that to 180 in X, minus 180 in Y, and 180 in Z. We'll scroll down and set the collision presets to overlap all, because we want it to overlap other buildings which are not dynamic. So overlap all dynamic wouldn't work, overlap all. And then we'll implement on component begin overlap and on component end overlap. Heading over to the event graph, we've got our two events here, but let's also add some variables. We want to store every other building that this one here is overlapping. So let's call that overlapping buildings. The type for that will of course be a master building object reference. And if we have a look at the containers, we could use an array for that, but I will choose the option beneath that, which is a set, so that curly brackets here. We haven't used sets in this tutorial series yet, so let me quickly explain them. They're actually very similar to arrays in the sense that you store multiple values of the same variable type, so a BP master building here. However, in a set you don't care about the order, which you do in an array using your indices. The advantage though is that they are more performant if you don't need to worry about the order, and that means you only use them when you want to know whether an element is included or not and don't care about its position in the set at all. The other advantage of set is that you can't have multiple elements of the same value. For example, in an integer array you could have 3 elements, for example, that all just read 1. In a set that wouldn't be possible, so only one element with the value 1 would be added in that case, which is also very handy for overlapping buildings. Then let's add another variable of type boolean called overlapping question mark, and that will just be a single variable. Basically this one isn't even required, but it will tell us whether our overlapping building set contains at least one element. We will also add 2 events, one called on overlapping begin and the second one on overlapping end. So these two here won't be called every time that we overlap something, like the 2 events here from our box collider. This one here on overlap begin will only be called when we overlap our first building, and on overlapping end will just be called when we are no longer overlapping any building. Let's implement them right away. So on overlapping begin we will set overlapping to true. Then we will grab the build widget and hide that, so set visibility of that to hidden, and we will do the exact same thing for our building mesh, so set visibility of that to hidden. The on-overlapping event just does the exact reverse thing. So we can copy all of our 3 nodes and paste them, and then just exchange the values of the booleans. So overlapping will be false, visibility will be true, and true here as well. Now we will do the 2 events that come with the engine by default. So on component begin overlap. And first off, let's check that the other actor is not equal to self. So we're not just overlapping ourselves. Add a branch and hook that up. If that is true, we want to see 2 things. First off, we have to know whether that other actor we are overlapping is a building, because otherwise that's not interesting for us. And the second one will be that the component that we're overlapping is a static mesh. So in that case, the building mesh, because the onComponent begin overlap event would also be called if we are, for example, overlapping the build widget. So first off, grab the other component and we'll cast that to the static mesh component on the true path. And if that cast is successful, we'll grab the other actor and cast that to the master building. That up to the cast success here. We will also ignore everything if that building that we're overlapping is in its previous stage and not already built. So off of your SBP master building, grab the build boolean and add a branch. If that is true, we can grab our overlapping buildings set and add an element to that. And the element will be our SBP master building. Then we will add another branch and check for our overlapping boolean, because if that is false, we will call on overlapping begin. And if we then have a look here, that will then set it to true. So that means this path here is only called the first time that we add an overlap building. Let's grab our first branch and the 2 cast nodes of begin overlap and copy paste them for end overlap. Then hook up the other actor to the not equal, the other component to the cast to static mesh, and other actor to the cast to master building, and hook up the execution. If it is a master building, we also have to add another branch, because we want to see whether our overlapping building sets contains item, and that is the BP master building here. If that is true, we have to remove it. So copy your overlapping buildings and just remove the SBP master building. Then, if it's the case that this was the last overlapping buildings, we have to call on overlapping end. So let's grab another branch. But before we do that, grab your overlapping buildings and convert that to an array, because otherwise we can't get the amount of elements in there. After that, go into the branch, and off of our array, we can get the length, so amount of items, and we'll check whether that is less than or equal to 0. Should never be less than 0, but just to be sure. And if it's true, call on overlapping end. File and save. So right now everything would work fine. The mesh would be hidden and the build widget. However, you would still be able to place the building using your left mouse button. So close your master building class, and in our building manager, we'll go to the place current building event, because here we've got a branch that just checks whether we can build building. We want to add a second condition. So off of the out of can build building, we will add an end boolean, hook up the end to the branch. The second condition will be that our current building overlapping variable is false. So off of overlapping, look for not boolean, hook that up to the end, compile and save. That's it for the logic. The last step will just be to go into your child classes. So building floor, stairs and wall. Let's open them up. And adjust the position and maybe the size of our little collision box. So we will open them in full blueprint editor. And let's start with the floor. So we'll head over to the viewport, select our box and set the location to 190. Lower the position in Z to, let's say, 20. And in Y we will center it to -200. That's looking fine. Compile and save, close the floor. We'll proceed with the wall. Select your box. Location will be 180 in X. -60 in Y, and 180 for Z is fine. Compile and save. And finally we do the stairs. So in our viewport, select the box. Location will be 210 in X, -200 in Y, 180 in Z, that's fine. And then we'll just bump up the box extend in Y to, let's say, the double amount, so 180. Compile, save, and let's check whether that is working. Alright, I'm in play mode again. Let's start building a wall here. And here, to the left of it, I would be able to build something, but if my mouse goes over that, I'll just see the health bar and I don't see another wall on top of it. If I hit the left mouse button, nothing happens until I find a free spot. Let's see whether that's also working for our stairs. So let's just build a floor here. Then we will build walls in there. And we now should also be able to build a stair in here. At least you can do that in Fortnite. So let's hit F8 and then I'll jump and build the stairs. Alright, so that's working perfectly fine. And that's it for this episode. In the next one, we will actually set up a custom character, the one from the Paragon assets that we imported in episode 1. And we will also add an attack move so that we can gain resources from interactable objects and destroy our buildings. See you then.